And welcome, everyone, to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, and we are live on YouTube. It's Season 9 already, and we're here to talk about your Missouri Basketball Tigers as the only podcast strictly talking about Mizzou Basketball. I am your host, Sam Snelling. I'm on the right now. This is weird still. We're still getting used to our new streaming setup. But yeah, so I'm on the right, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see me there. Take a moment to hit the like button if you can, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You will get kind of notifications for when we kind of do stuff like this. And with me this time, from the plains of central Indiana, proud papa of a new baby Bassett, Mr. Matthew J. Harris. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. I wish there was some correlation between me getting a new dog and recruiting, but there's not. But busy weekend. We got a new dog. Mizzou got a new 5-star forward. So everyone won. Everyone prevailed this weekend. Everyone got something they wanted and something they coveted. So
it was a good weekend all around for Mizzou athletics. Obviously, the big news of beating Kansas. The renewal of the border showdown, I think is what we're supposed to call it, but I will always call it the border war. That was exciting. That was fun. A little panicked in the first quarter, but they recovered and got things done. We saw, pictures, coming out early, on Twitter and Blue Sky of Toni Bryant, and Dennis Gates kind of walking around and seeing the sights. And so it was good to see that he trekked and made it there. And Mizzou made a good impression. It did seem like the Tigers were the team that were, that were in the driver's seat for a while. It was all about kind of getting him on campus, getting the guys to mix in with them so we can kind of see what it's like to be with the rest of the team, make sure the fit's good there. And then, I think once everybody sort of saw that he was comfortable there, had the right plan, he was ready to pull the trigger after, I think, initially kind of saying that he was originally going to want to wait a little bit. Not necessarily this time.
Yeah, I mean, the timeline had sort of backed up. It had been when he was setting visits, he was saying he might let it go all throughout his senior year. To sort of just see what rosters would look like when portal was done. By August, that had changed to, we're thinking he's going to get it done by November, December, and then in recent weeks it's sort of been compressed, and that's sort of further, and that sort of correlated with Missouri moving into the driver's seat here. So I think a lot of us who've been tracking it have been sort of wondering, like, okay, would he sort of cement this? Would he take a visit to NC State, which was considered kind of the other threat here? Arizona was sort of on the periphery. He had visits set up to Michigan and a couple other places. He'd already been to Kansas. So I think the question was just, how long might a lag exist? And, well, not long, 2 days. So kudos to Toni for being efficient with this decision-making process and getting it over with. But I think it's a good testament to sort of Missouri making him the priority, not letting up when they got into a favorable position in closing, and really addressing probably what I would say wasn't on paper wasn't a huge need positionally, but if you were to look at the potential that they've acquired here, and we can talk about sort of what that is, but I think that was the bigger deal, is to get a guy with the kind of potential that Toni has at a position that they highly value was critical, and to get it done early in the cycle. I mean, we still haven't really seen a lot of commitments start rolling yet. So Missouri to have its two headliners at key positions locked in before you even really get to the high tide of commitment season is really, really good. And now they can sort of round this class out the way they want. And we can talk about that as we move through as well.
Yeah, so what Bryant does is he basically if you go by the 247 Sports Composite, Missouri currently has the top overall recruiting class. I don't necessarily expect that to end up that way, but I think anytime you're starting a recruiting class with a couple of 5-stars, you have to be feeling really very good about the way the class is being put together. We've talked about Jason Crow. I think one of the things that the staff was really kind of hoping to do was to sort of find him like a good pick and roll partner. Bryant looks like he kind of fits that. So, what was your take? You've watched a whole lot more film on him than I have. What's your take on Bryant? What he kind of projects to be, at least in the early going, and why he's so valued as a prospect.
I think the first thing you have to understand is when he came into this spring, he had been cemented around 14 or 15 in a lot of composite rankings, either at 247 or at On3. And really a lot of that was based on his measurables, 6'9", +2 wingspan, a frame that could still accommodate more weight. He entered last year around 180, came in this spring around 210 or 215, and he still, if you look at his shoulders, can take more weight through the upper torso. So I think his frame was really, really good. Athletically, I'll expand on this in a minute, but high-level athlete and just plays insanely hard. And so if you watched him at all, he's a guy with the kind of frame that you see at the next level. He plays hard, and I think the one thing that jumps out on tape when you watch him is it's really hyper-technical, and I was texting a couple people about this day. He just moves differently at 6'9", 215 pounds. And what I mean by that is watch him in a closeout situation. Like if you watch him rotate to a guard and close out, a lot of times bigs are either slow in that first step. He's got great initial burst. The first 1 to 2 steps are insanely quick. If a guard drives a closeout, watch how quickly his hips flip and he can get into a slide and get into a stance. It's insanely quick. It's insanely fluid. Not a lot of guys at his size can do that. If you watch him in some ball screen situations, there are times this spring where he can get skinny around a pick and roll at 6'9". So it's not so much his size, his wingspan or anything else. It's just the way he moves is so different and so fluid and so effortless at his size that it almost looks sometimes like he's not playing hard. And I think sometimes when you watch him on tape, when he has struggled in spot ups, he's upright in a stance. He's almost trusting his physicality and his athleticism to make up some ground there for him. But he just moves in a way that's very, very different for a guy his size. If you watch him in transition, he's beating guards up the floor in the first 1 to 2 steps. That's insanely rare. And we're talking from short outlet pass, and he's starting from the same point on the block and beating guys up the floor. Straight line speed is very, very good. His catch radius, if you watch tape today in the commitment post, you just put it in the vicinity of the rim. You can go get it. So a lot of the traits and athleticism are just things you cannot teach, and he plays insanely hard. And I think what a lot of people were waiting on this spring was, okay, we know he can do all these things I just talked about. Are we going to see some signs of skill? Are we going to see him kind of round some things out? And I think that was an area where he tried at times, and I think I wrote this a couple of places, and I'm not the only one, but I think a lot of us have noticed it. He kind of gets to the point where he presses a little bit, like he wants to show, I can catch, pivot, face up at the elbow, and shoot. Or I can catch on the right block, dribble move, set up a defender on my high side, and spin to the baseline. It looks like he's trying to demonstrate that he can have a skill rather than it just being a sort of fluid thing for him. And I think there are times when he's trying to do that where it's not so quick and decisive that he becomes a little bit of a ball stop. He struggled in some instances like that. So the question is, can you get him to the point where he's got some tools, in some positions either on the mid post or at the elbow that he can trust and go to and be decisive with and finish with? And I think a lot of people sort of said, okay, we know he's a high-level athlete. We know there are things we can't teach here, but we're going to hold him, around 15 or 20, and we're going to see what the development looks like. So what this is all saying is Missouri's got a guy who the best, and it's a terrible thing to compare it to, but he's a chassis for a car. It's very well made. You can build anything you want on it. You could build an SUV on it. You could build a truck on it. You could build, maybe a sports car on it, but it's the kind of thing that offers them some flexibility for them. The question is, what's Missouri going to do with it, and what is Toni going to do with it? To your point, you could make him into a pick and roll partner. He didn't really get that a lot at times with Trey Man Elite, who he played for this spring. Can you make him into a guy where, he had some opportunities to catch the elbow? Can you get him to where he can catch, turn, face, and drive from the elbow and do some things like Mark Mitchell does in 1 or 2 dribble bully drives? Can you get him to where he trusts some post-up stuff? So I think that's the big thing here is offensively, he's a little bit of a blank slate. Defensively, all the tools are there to be a menacing, switchable 4 guy. And I think the last thing I'll say, and then I'll hand it over to you and I'll stop blabbering, is I think his near-term impact is going to be on the defensive end. Shocker. But he is switchable. He can guard 1 to 4. If he adds a little frame, he could probably hold up against 5s. You'd like to see him be a little bit more disruptive in terms of steals and blocks, but all the tools are there for him to be a menace defensively. And if this is the Dennis Gates team that you want and it's playing at the tempo it wants, he's going to make an impact in transition running the floor. So lots of tools, lots of traits, but he's a guy too that, doesn't project as a straight one and done, but there's enough there that over the next couple of years, you'll really feel like if he's cultivated properly, you're going to have a high level player.
And, I think it was interesting. I read Finkelstein's article on 247 Sports. I think Finkelstein's a really thoughtful scout. And one of the things that I think, and this is something that we've recognized for several years now, that Missouri's program for development and their players internally as they go from one summer to the next is really, really good, and has been a plus for especially at a time when there's so much roster turnover, and being able to convince guys is like, look, if you buy into this and you give us time, we can give you the tools and really build you up into the player that you want to be. And I think that's something that we kind of recognized early, and it's nice seeing some kind of national guys, speak to that. And that was like the feature of what Finkelstein was saying is like why this is a good fit for Bryant, is that, Missouri is going to, give him an opportunity to see the floor, but do so in a way that, they're going to make sure that, he's working on what he's most efficient at, and then, developing the things that you're not in the early going. So it really seems like this is the kind of fit that, that makes a lot of sense for both sides.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, I'm working on a piece about it for this week, is I think Bryant sort of is a middle way for Missouri to get a developmental prospect whose near-term upside can be more helpful for them. So the best way to think about this was when we looked at Peyton Marshall or a Jordan Butler. If you ran really, really, really thorough projections on them, those guys at most projected as 8 to 10 minutes a game, 2.8 points, 2.3 rebounds. And that was in line with what you would expect with where they were in the composite. They were not guys that you brought in and said, okay, we can put you in a prominent, top 7, top 8 spot in the rotation. We're going to have to pick and choose minutes for you, and you're probably going to see a lot of them in bye games and non-con. Toni Bryant is from a section of the composite where the median for those guys is playing about 750 possessions and a BPR of around 2.4. That is a fancy way of saying he's solidly a role guy. You can probably count on Toni Bryant to come in, and if you look at prospects like him at his positional group, he's going to come in and he's going to be a top 7, top 8 guy in your rotation. That, in the near term, is really helpful for you, because that means, what you don't have to go do? You don't have to compromise and go take a Josh Gray. You're not having to go get a Sean Phillips Jr., guys who have already plateaued and are at the end of their developmental curve, at the end of their skill curve. Like, those guys are probably only going to have BPRs around 1.5 or 1.6. Toni will, if he does what he's supposed to do and he's in line with others, will be ahead of them as a freshman. And if you develop him properly, which we've seen this staff get really good gains from guys in year 2, then in year 2, Toni becomes a guy that is a prominent piece in your rotation. So what you've essentially done is you've got a guy that, one, gets you off the carousel of portal bigs or portal front court pieces, but also you've sped up the developmental timeline by at least a year to get to him and get him into the rotation. So that's the big thing here. People say, is he a one and done? Are we going to have him for a year? The biggest thing is he's the right guy that you can get to maximize that second year developmental jump that this staff is really, really good at. And, Leonard Hamilton's program showed. So that's what people should be excited about here is if Toni Bryant does what he's supposed to do, he can be a top 8 rotational piece next year. Doesn't mean he has to be a starter. Doesn't mean he has to be an all-SEC freshman, but he can come in and help them right away with doing things that this program needs, which is switchable force. Guys who can play in aggressive pick and roll coverages out on the perimeter, guys who can handle short duration switches on big wings, and he's going to run the floor. So that right there is why people should be happy. We can talk about, the optics, we can talk about long-term upside, but next year he can help them with very specific things that this rotation needs. And I think that's the big news here is they found a middle way, hopefully, and they can also maybe start transitioning away from having to do some shopping towards the back end of the portal. So we'll see. He's got to come and he's got to do the work, but that's what's really exciting about this pickup.
So you have your 5-star forward. You have your 5-star combo guard. You also have like 4 available spots on the roster. Obviously churn is going to churn, but if you are projecting a roster out, you still have spots.
Yeah.
And we both seem to think that Missouri is not done with their freshman recruiting. They've still got visits planned. They're still almost said, Terrace again, but Tristan Reed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be fighting that probably for a while.
Probably.
But yeah, so they still would like to add Reed to the class. He's got some additional visits to take, and then Aiden Chronister is a guy who they've still prioritized to sort of pluck out of the recruiting ranks as well. Is there more to the class beyond that? What are we kind of watching for as they've clearly got the 2 key cogs? What's next?
I would keep an eye on, do they want to add Reed or do they want to add Chronister? Do they want to go to 4 freshmen? We've always consistently heard that 2 to 3 is the right number. Watkins and I, Matt Watkins and I have been on this forum. We've been on our forums. We've been on Twitter, and everyone's saying, now's the time to get high school kids. Now is the time to go get guys that you think can, be good long-term assets for you, because everyone is like portal, or international. If you can go get guys who have long-term upside, but also a short-term skill, go get them. And I think that is what Tristan Reed and what Aiden Chronister offer. Tristan Reed can bury guys on the post and score over his left shoulder, and he can, protect the rim as a backline anchor for you, and he rebounds the heck out of the ball. That is useful for you in this rotation. We can debate the upside and, can you grow him into anything else? We talked about that last month, and I both agree with it, but are on kind of the same page. But that guy can come in on day one and do things for this team that they need. And he would complement what Toni Bryant does. If you have Toni Bryant roaming around, blowing shit up on the perimeter, and you have Tristan on the back line, anchoring and rebounding, and those 2 guys both capable of putting them up, and picking them up, and putting them down, and running the floor in transition, that's pretty good. So if you can get that, I would absolutely take it. That's a good. Reed is a guy that I think projects as at minimum a good 4-year rotational piece. Chronister, I get some of the hesitation. I think everybody this spring wanted to see if he could build on being more than just a spot-up shooter. I don't know if that happened for him. I think as the spring went on, he kind of fell back into some typecasting, and that was shooting off the catch. And, when he tried to play off the bounce and attack the rim, the results were mixed. But He's a 6'7" guy that was probably one of the top 10 or 15 shooters in the country. He's got good positional size, and he plays really good team defense. You know what you need in this rotation? Guys who can bang in weak side 3 balls, play good team defense, and, move the ball and make, hockey assists. You know who can do that? Aiden Chronister can do that. So I think that's, to me, why you take those guys is there are things they already do that when they get on campus, you can plug them in and do them. And you know what you're looking for sometimes in the portal? Guys who can rim protect, rim finish, bang in threes.
Mm-hmm.
Why go overpay in the portal? Why pay 600, 700,000 in the portal for that when you can go get a high school kid that, can do some of those same things? So to me, the question is not, should they take one of Reed or Chronister? They should take both of them, frankly. If it were me, we'll see what they do. We'll see. We know what they value. But they spent a lot of time this spring looking for a rim-running, rim-protecting big, and a lot of time looking for a spacer. Who's left on the board? A rim-running, rim-protecting big and a spacer. So just cut out the middleman and go get them right now. That would be my posture.
And you've already shown the value of moderately ranked recruits, coming in as freshmen and maybe not playing a whole lot and then coming into larger roles as sophomores. You've shown that, in 1 year when you got, Ant and Trent, guys stepped into big roles. I think that there's a good possibility that we see 3 guys who are in that same sort of position this year. Obviously, it remains to be seen what happens with with their current freshmen. But this is the easiest way to sort of build your roster is go get guys that do X, Y, Z, and teach them to do maybe some other things, and then you really work on that continuity, and something that I think you and I both agree that is still undervalued by a lot of coaches these days. And so if you're looking for as we like to say, market inefficiencies, this is a market inefficiency, is a lot of programs aren't wanting to take guys like Chronister. You can let him, if he wants to go to an A10 school or he wants to go to MVC school or wherever, and have a bigger role up front, or you take that guy, you keep him at 13 in the rotation, and then as a sophomore, he's ready to really help you out. I think there's more value there. That's what I would prefer. So I'm with you. I don't see any reason for them to not go to four guys in this class, and I frankly would be fine if they, we're still out there recruiting somebody else to go to 5. I don't necessarily think that, going younger when the upside is higher, than overpaying for guys that, obviously we haven't really seen him play, so I don't want to throw anybody completely under the bus, but knowing what you're probably spending on a guy like Jaden Stone or Sean Phillips and those guys, like you said, we've seen a lot of holes in in the scouting for what they can provide, and I think you can basically get a younger guy who can do similar things and build them up, and then if you have them for 2 years, then you have something to really work with.
The best thing I can show here is, and I'll try and be quick with it, is I do fun things like plotting. So this is probably the best thing. This is, if people can see it, I don't know if they can. Can people see a graphic on the screen? There we go. I can see it. Yeah, this is every guy on the top 4 shoe circuits that played at least 5 games. 1,000 dudes. Top of the recruiting market. They're all here on one chart. This is how many possessions per game they average for offensive usage. This is their points per possession. So we can see usage and efficiency. Jason Crow, kind of out here near these pink lines, which are the top 20% for each guy. Jason Crow just misses being in that elite spot. Toni Bryant just misses. Here are some other guys that Missouri had offered and didn't quite land. Ja'Shawn Andrews, I'm still sad about you. But over here, underneath Tony's name is Aiden Chronister. Aiden just missed being in that little section. That's good for a wing because he's not going to get a lot of on-ball touches, which would drive his possessions up. That's good for a floor spacer. Tristan Reed, sitting over here near Sheik Pearson, Ethan Taylor, two guys who are probably 20 spots ahead of him in the rankings. Pretty efficient. This is where you want to see bigs who are not primary bigs is over in here. Tristan Reed, very, very good. They have two guys they could add that are hyper efficient for their positions and near the top of their positions. Tristan Reed was one of the best rim finishers in the country or on the EYBL. Aiden Cronster, one of the top 15 floor spacers. This chart tells you they are close to a lot of other 5-stars in here in terms of their efficiency and their performance. Why wouldn't you want to go get one of those guys when you know that's what you're going to look for as a specialist in the portal and you know you might be able to get him for half the cost? Why not? That's a Costco savings right there. Just go and get that talent, get those guys that can plug right in and use them. Plus, if you get them, there's one other fun chart. I shared it on Twitter, but I'll share it again here. If I can get to it, it may take a second to pop up. This is, if it wants to go, we'll see if it's going to.
There we go.
These are all the recruiting classes since 2010. All of them in the 247 composite. You can see the points they got for each class and their average recruit. Here's Missouri right now. Unsurprisingly, they have 2 5-stars, so they're way out here. This is what happens if they sign Aiden Chronister, and that's it. This is what happens if they just take Tristan Reed. This is what happens if they take all of them. These are elite recruiting classes right here. These are the Dukes, the Kentuckys, all the ones that you feel like you're chasing. You're right there. Would this go down if you take transfers like the 2024 did? Probably. But you're starting right there in the top of the top. So why wouldn't you go get more talent?
Yeah.
Why not go get more talent? It has a near-term payoff. It also gives you the fun optics of being in the top in the country, and you're also really good at developing dudes. Go get more high school kids. While everybody else is trying to figure out if some Latvian's 10 points per game in the Adriatic League is going to translate, or if you're trying to figure out if you can maybe squeeze 13 and 8 out of a guy out of the MEAC. Go get somebody who does one or two things really well and then develop him. So that's me. That's my view. We'll see what they do and how they view it, but that would be my position. Go get these guys right now.
And I think it still leaves you available to take
2 slots this spring in the portal.
Yeah, to take a Sebastian Mack, to take a Javon Porter, to take guys that are going to impact your lineup, and that you expect for them to impact your lineup. Now, are they? I think when you take somebody like Stone or I think they're really hoping that Phillips is kind of turns into something better than he's been, just with some helpful coaching. I'm skeptical. I believe you are also skeptical. Maybe if you had him for 2 years, I could buy into that. But one off season isn't a lot for a guy that just hasn't really been coached for 4 years. But if you're adding talent out of the high school ranks and you're developing that talent, and then when spring comes, you know what you've got after a year of watching, your freshmen, your sophomores, the guys that you want to bring back. And then as the portal opens, okay, you know what we need? We need Sebastian Mack. We need a Javon Porter. And you can focus very heavily on those guys, and then those guys become easier because you know exactly what budget you have to spend because you only need 1 or 2 spots.
So you're talking about doing what Rick Barnes does, every year. Rick Barnes
Tennessee's been pretty good.
Brings back a bunch of dudes, but you know what Rick Barnes knows he needs? One year he's like, I need a big scoring wing. I'm gonna go get a future NBA guy. Last year, he kind of needed a convoy, one who could shoot a little bit off movement. He went and got Chaz Lanier. He needed a point guard this year. You know what he did? He went and got Jacoby Gillespie. And then he also brought in an NBA wing, or probably a top 5 pick in the NBA draft, in Nate Ament. Yeah. That's what he did. Rick Barnes goes into every spring knowing he needs 1 or 2 dudes who he's replacing. He can very clearly sell a role to the guy. And the thing about Gillespie was Gillespie hadn't hit the portal yet, and people were like, oh, yeah, that's Tennessee's guy. They've been on him for a while. That's what happens when you have all your front court pieces back, and you're like, we know what we're doing there. You could retain Bishop Boswell, a top 70 kid who was a combo guard we liked, and you're going to develop him. And you got Amari Abram as a depth piece, but we need one really good dude out of the portal, and that's a point guard. And you could sell him on it. So I think that's where you want to get to, is you want to get, in Missouri's case, it's sort of the inverse. It's, okay, we know we maybe need a vet specialist to be, a malleable defensive perimeter, a defender on the perimeter to back up our combo guard lineup. Or we need maybe another 4 guy who can come in and, give us a jumbo lineup. But we developed our core guys. So for Missouri, I think it's almost sort of the inverse, where Missouri goes into a spring, if they've done their development properly, and say, we have a need for very specific 2 up transfers. And if you're taking those up transfers, if those guys have, a 2.0 BPR, that's fine, because that's what you expect from them. That's what they should be giving you. So I think the big thing I would tell them,
it's also akin to adding somebody like a Luke Northweather, and a guy who, they've sort of said, there's not a lot of the NIL budget that's committed to a guy. He wanted to kind of come back. So you are getting maybe a little bit of a discount there, which is nice. But, the same sort of role of here's a guy who kind of fits what we're trying to do. He's limited. He's not really going to be a starter. He's not going to be a guy who's going to, you're going to want to plug in for 25 minutes a game. But if he's your backup or
pick and pop
third
guy,
string center, as a pick and pop guy, you're feeling okay with that. Yeah. So really, if you had guys that were slotted ahead of him that were more like a Toni Bryant after a full year of development, then maybe you're feeling a little better there. But I think we're we're kind of getting at the same thing, that the idea here with the rest of the class, just go get those 2 guys, finish your class with those 2 guys, and then let's look at a couple spots in the spring, and see what you got there. And I think that sort of sets them up to sort of get to where I think they want to be, which is similar to the Florida State model, and Watkins has published all kinds of literature on what that looks like. But certainly landing guys like Crow, landing guys like Toni Bryant, ups the ante on the excitement level for what those guys can bring. Anything else you wanted to hit on before we
pass
the mic?
I thought people on forums ask a question and it's always a fun sort of thing to think about, is, where this class could, if it comes to fruition, if they were to go to 4 guys, where it would sort of sit all time. I think, to me, it would, I'm looking at the, average and median recruiting ranking since the move to the SEC. It would clearly be based on average composite rating and median composite rating, be the best class they've had since they moved to the SEC. Now we'd have to see what transfers would do to that, but that 4-man class, it would be the best one they've had in at least 13 years. And then you're looking back between probably Quinn up through, Mike Anderson and into the early part of Haith. That Quinn 2000 class was, I think, for all the young kids, that was a class of Ricky Paulding, Arthur Johnson, Trevon Bryant. That was 3 dudes between 20 and 38 in the RSCI composite.
Yeah.
And then Wesley Stokes was the low man at number 70. Mm-hmm. That, if you're talking about, that was the number 2 class in America in 2000.
That kind of predates the modern
composite.
RSCI, so no rivals, no 247 sports back then. We used to not know as much about these high school kids for anybody that's younger than than the two of us, which is probably a lot of people these days. Yeah, like recruiting coverage has come a long way, and it changed a lot, and it got really, really, I think it picked up in the mid sort of 2000s.
Yeah.
So 2004, 5, 6, around that like Kevin Durant kind of.
Yeah. If you were to go back and look at the 2000 class, that wasn't just a highly rated class. You go look at the winning those guys did and the performance those guys had. So Wesley Stokes transferred back out west, but the three guys in that class were the core of some really, really teams that made some, inconsistency sometime in the regular season, but they had some good runs in the postseason. There were stretches where they looked like a top 10 team. That was probably the best pure recruiting class that we've seen since then. And then you're probably going to have to go back and look at maybe, I can't remember the class with Kelly Thames in it. There are guys that remember classes from the 80s, but man, I don't have Tom Kolchansky's like national recruiting newsletter. I can't go. I'm sure if I looked around hard enough, somebody has maybe like scanned copies of it and I could look back. But if you're talking about in the last quarter century, it's probably the 2000 class, maybe 2003, maybe 2017 at the top, 2024, and then this one. So it's tracking to be one of the 4 or 5 best in the last quarter century if they are able to pull it off. And the biggest difference is they're going to have stacked 2 of them within 3 years. So I think the biggest thing is we probably haven't seen a sustained run of high-end recruiting like this since Quinn Snyder's early tenure. So we're talking at least 20 to 25 years. So God, that dates me. At least I was in middle school when that was happening. But that's probably the last sustained run of real top-end recruiting.
I played in high school with guys that were recruited by Norm Stewart. So that definitely dates me. Well, let's wrap this up. We're going to get out of here. I appreciate everybody, tuning in for the live show. We are, like I said, still kind of getting used to our new setup using Riverside FM after years of StreamYard. But we're excited. I think there's some really cool features that we've got. So basically, for those who kind of want to know what our schedule, I'd like to kind of give you a little update on the schedule. This is probably the last time that Matt Harris and I will podcast together until our preseason preview podcast. Unless there's some kind of crazy breaking news that we just have to jump in and talk about. But I think the plan is essentially like I've got some interviews kind of lined up. We're going to do some stuff there. We've got some really kind of interesting people to talk to. And then the Mats are going to hook up and do a podcast at some point. And then right before the season, we've already kind of confirmed that our buddy Blake Lovell's going to come back and do kind of like our annual preview for the basketball season. So pretty excited on what's coming up in the next 8 weeks. Not much time left. So yeah, take your breaks days. Now. Yeah, we'll have at least a couple weeks off, and then we'll come back with some fun interview stuff. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back. We'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.